Every time I post a video featuring my sim rig, I get a handful of comments asking why I don't have a triple screen sim racing rig setup anymore. Some of these are quite polite, while others definitely step into that "son, you picked the wrong team" category. So today's video is meant to explain why I embrace the single screen life, and I'll also use it as an opportunity to talk about some of the pros and cons of single and triple screen sim racing setups. Hello fellow sim racers. One of the first videos that I made that really seemed to take off was a guide to setting up triple screens. I was a big fan of that setup at the time, but I also went to great lengths to discuss some of the pitfalls to that approach. Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, there was something that I hadn't yet fully realised that would ultimately lead to my ditching the triple screen setup and going back to one conventional screen. Essentially, triple screens forced far too many compromises on my video making workflow and the hardware that runs it. For the content that I like to make with a strong focus on the visuals, triples just kept getting in the way, both figuratively and sometimes literally. External capture hardware really didn't play well with the triples, and running 1080p screens wasn't going to cut it either. So that meant 1440p or 4K, which is no issue in sims running older visual engines, but not in the latest and greatest, and certainly not with the visual settings cranked up and a decent stable frame rate as well. And then there's the fact that after all of that effort and hard work, you're throwing away 2/3 of the image, either in the capture or in the edit itself, when you come to make a video from it. So then, long story short, as my sim racing journey transitioned more towards content creation, I found triples to be more restricting than they were helpful. But, and this is important, for most sim racers, that's probably not going to be the case. So I'm going to spend the rest of this video discussing some of the pros and cons of single screens. Racing with triples was fantastic. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. VR is perhaps a little bit more visceral, but it comes with its own compromises, and overall, I preferred the triple screen setup across the whole gamut of sim racing titles and use cases. Obviously, what triple screens offer is an increased field of view, and that makes things better from an awareness and a sightlines perspective, and it really helps with the immersion as well. With a triple screen setup, your sightlines behave a lot more like they would in a real car. You can look deeper into the circuit ahead, especially when cornering, and that's something that every driving coach on the planet preaches. You have a better representation of the spatial side of things as well, which is super helpful when you're 3 wide on the run down to turn 1. Moreover, you can actually see your mirrors, which I'm told does have its advantages. When all is said and done, I don't think a triple screen setup is going to make you any faster, but it certainly is an advantage in close wheel-to-wheel racing. And I think there's a lot to be said for being able to see further through the corners as well. As for the immersion side of things, well, it should be fairly obvious that filling your peripheral vision with more of the sim rather than your office space or your bedroom really does help things no end. Racing with triple screens is great, and I do miss my setup. What I don't miss is all of the extra stuff that comes with it. First up, you need fairly deep pockets. 3 screens and a GPU to drive them isn't a trivial investment, and the better the screens, the worse that problem becomes. If you want to run 1440p or, God forbid, 4K monitors triples, then you're going to need a PC that costs way more than your first car did. And even then, good luck getting titles with modern visuals running well on triple 4K screens. From what I've seen, most people running triples in 2020 are still using 1080p panels, and you know what, I think that's pretty reasonable. Most sim racers I know would sacrifice a little bit of visual fidelity for better performance. Unfortunately for me, with what I do, I need things to look shiny as well. There is one other issue about triples that's rarely discussed, and that's the space they take. A big sim rig with 3 decent sized monitors can easily fill a small room. My setup was too big for the space I had really, even with the relatively modest 27-inch panels and the small next level racing rig that I had at the time. Simple is beautiful. A single monitor needs 2 cables for signal and power. It needs a GPU driving 1/3 of the pixels of a triple screen setup, and it just takes much less space. Cable management is less obnoxious, reliability improves massively, and so does usability for non-sim racing tasks. On top of that, some sims, well, they just flat out don't work with triples, or they don't work well. And then there's those older titles that you may want to run that really didn't foresee your 10 grand sim racing setup and its many, many monitors. But you lose that immersiveness and you lose the natural sightlines. Furthermore, you lose that helpful spatial awareness that triples grant, a gift both for yourself and the people around you in turn 1. Some of this is mitigated with the use of an ultra-wide, but well, that's a topic for another video. Ultimately, choosing single, triple, VR or ultra-wide is an exercise in compromise. No approach is the right approach, and the value proposition is going to vary massively from user to user, and that's really the whole point of this video. So then, I'll wrap things up with a question. What are your experiences moving from one video output device to another? Did you find there were unexpected benefits or consequences, and ultimately, are you still happy with your decision?